Most people believe the right text is about finding the perfect words, but words only work when they come from emotional stability and self-respect, because language without inner alignment sounds hollow even through a screen, and people subconsciously feel when a message is driven by fear or need. If the text is sent to provoke guilt, it reveals unresolved attachment, and attachment always weakens the impact no matter how clever the phrasing. The real power comes from sending nothing until you no longer need a response, because emotional independence changes the meaning of every word you write. When you stop hoping for validation, the message becomes grounded and calm energy is what makes someone pause and reassess their actions. A text sent from emotional control feels different because it isn't reactive. It doesn't explain or justify or ask to be understood. It simply reflects clarity about what you will and won't accept. When someone expects anger or begging and receives composure instead, their mind struggles to categorize the interaction in familiar terms. This disruption creates curiosity and delayed emotional processing because they realize you are no longer operating from the same place. The absence of emotional chaos removes their sense of control, and control is often mistaken for connection in unhealthy dynamics. Losing that control is where discomfort and regret quietly begin. When your words are clean and uncharged, they don't invite debate. They close the loop instead of reopening emotional negotiations. This forces the other person to sit alone with their behavior because there is nothing to argue against and nothing to fix. They replay the message later, not because it was dramatic, but because it marked a shift they didn't anticipate. The realization comes that access to you has changed permanently, and permanence carries more weight than any emotional outburst. Regret grows in the space where reaction used to live, and that space exists only when you are no longer reaching for them. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, when in reality it is restraint, because reacting immediately may feel honest, but it keeps you emotionally available, and availability after being hurt can unintentionally reward the behavior. When you step back instead of responding, you create a pause that resets the dynamic. This pause removes the emotional feedback they were expecting from you, and without feedback, people are forced to sit with their own actions. Silence shifts the focus away from proving a point and toward self-control. It communicates that you are no longer operating on impulse or pain, and that internal regulation is what quietly changes the power balance, because power comes from choice, not from volume. There are moments, however, when silence has already done its work, when enough space exists that a single message can land with clarity. This is not the text sent to reopen conversation or seek closure. It is the text that closes the emotional door without slamming it. It acknowledges what happened without reliving the story, and it states your boundary without asking for agreement. Strength of this message is in what it refuses to engage with, because it doesn't defend itself or justify the decision. It simply informs and releases the situation back to them, and that finality carries a quiet emotional weight. When someone receives a calm closing message after expecting chaos, their mind searches for leverage and finds none. They can't argue with your feelings because you're not debating them, and they can't pull you back in because you've removed the opening. This forces reflection instead of reaction, which is deeply uncomfortable, especially for someone used to emotional back and forth. Regret begins not as sadness, but as delayed awareness. Awareness that the dynamic they took for granted has ended, and that it ended without drama or pursuit, which makes the loss feel real and self-inflicted. Most people believe regret comes from confrontation, from finally saying everything they held inside, but confrontation usually triggers defense rather than Reflection, because the moment someone feels attacked, they stop listening. Defensiveness protects the ego instead of examining behavior. And when the ego is protected, growth is postponed. This is why emotional accusations rarely create lasting impact. They give temporary relief but no internal shift. Real regret requires space for self-examination, and that space disappears the moment blame enters the conversation. A message that triggers reflection feels unexpectedly balanced. It doesn't deny the pain, yet it refuses to dramatize it. It speaks from understanding rather than emotional superiority, and this disarms the automatic urge to justify or counterattack. When someone realizes they're being seen clearly without judgment, they lose the ability to rewrite the story in their favor, because calm truth doesn't need agreement to stand. It simply exists as a mirror they can't look away from. This creates cognitive discomfort that lingers beyond the moment, and lingering discomfort is where self-awareness begins. The most powerful realization comes when reflection meets consequence, when understanding is followed by the loss of access. Seeing someone process pain and still choose themselves forces the other person to confront the contrast between growth and stagnation. They recognize that while you evolved emotionally, they remained unchanged, and this comparison happens silently over time, not during the conversation but in moments of absence. Regret deepens when they realize the connection didn't end from chaos, but from clarity and self-respect they didn't anticipate, and that realization continues long after the message is read. Many people believe the final message is the most important part, but what actually lingers is the behavior that follows after the words, because words can be dismissed, but patterns cannot be ignored. Walking away with dignity communicates a standard rather than a reaction. It shows that your self-worth is not dependent on someone's remorse, and that independence reshapes how the entire connection is remembered. When you don't chase explanations or emotional closure, you demonstrate trust in your own perception and decision. This quiet certainty is far more unsettling than anger, because it removes the illusion that you needed them to heal. The most powerful message is the one that doesn't invite a reply, not because it's cold, but because it's complete within itself. It doesn't test whether they care or wait for reassurance. It simply marks a transition from emotional involvement. Self-alignment. When someone realizes you are no longer emotionally available, they begin to revisit moments they once minimized or justified. Regret forms when they see that access was lost without negotiation, that you didn't beg to be treated better or ask to be chosen. You chose yourself quietly and consistently instead, and that choice reframes their past behavior in a harsher light. Absence combined with peace is what gives meaning to the final words, because peace signals that you didn't leave emotionally wounded. It suggests growth happened instead of bitterness taking over. This challenges the narrative that you were dependent or fragile, and forces them to question their own emotional maturity. They may replay your message, but what stays with them is your calm, the way you didn't circle back or reopen the door. Dignity leaves no loose ends for the ego to cling to, and that unresolved space becomes the place where regret lives, because they recognize the loss came from their actions, not your reactions.